Deadly weekend for the United States, with at least 3 major mass shooting incidents, leaving a total of 13 people dead and several injured. One was at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, another at a flea market in Texas, and the third at a church in California. At least one person is dead and 5 others wounded after a man opened fire there at the Geneva Presbyterian Church. It's in Laguna Woods, California. Police have a suspect in custody. He's believed to be an Asian man in his 60s who does not live in the area. The suspect was detained at the scene after a group of parishioners at the church, mostly Taiwanese congregants, hogtied his legs and confiscated 2 handguns from him. The motive for that attack is still being investigated. In Buffalo, New York, 10 people were killed in what appears to have been a racially motivated shooting at a supermarket on Saturday. The suspect was wearing tactical gear. He live-streamed his attack. He is in police custody and has been identified as an 18-year-old white male. The US Department of Justice says it's investigating that mass shooting as a hate crime and an act of racially motivated violent extremism. Mourners gathered outside the supermarket to honour the victims, who ranged in age from 32 to 86. Shock spread after a manifesto was discovered, allegedly authored by the teenage white supremacist gunman. The 180-page document claimed that white Americans are in danger of being replaced in society by people of colour. Vice President Kamala Harris labelled the incident horrendous.
You are with her, never leaving or forsaking her, Father God, but watching over her, oh God.
It's horrendous. It's horrendous. In our country, we have to recognize that we may very well be experiencing an epidemic of hate towards so many Americans that is wrong. It is taking on a level of violence in the case of what happened in Buffalo, and we've seen it in other places in our country. And we all must speak out against it. Hate against any one of us, we should interpret it as being hate against all of us as a nation. We are a nation.
WION's correspondent Nick Harper joins us now live from Washington, D.C. And Nick, Kamala Harris there, President Biden also over the weekend interrupting his weekend because of another act of mass violence, expressing horror, insisting the country absolutely must unite to overcome hate. But in legislative terms, that doesn't add up to a row of beans, does it?
No, you're right, Simon. From a legislative point of view, it is all but impossible for President Biden, or really any president, to try and tackle this problem. Remember that the freedom of speech is enshrined in the US Constitution. It's there in the First Amendment. Changing that would be virtually impossible. It has been really a theme, I guess, of the whole of President Biden's time in office, this idea of overcoming hate. It's something that he mentioned many times during his inaugural address at the start of last year. Remember that bruising campaign that he waged against the former President Donald Trump. Hatred was very central to that campaign. It was something that President Biden wanted to overcome, but about a year or so into his presidency, he all but acknowledged that it would be virtually impossible to overcome that divisive hatred in the nation, that Republicans and Democrats have very different views, and many of those are deeply entrenched. However, there is a possibility from a legislative point of view of tackling hate speech, and that is something that the governor of New York State, Kathy Hochul, has been speaking about over the weekend. She's a resident of Buffalo. That's where she was originally born and raised, and she has been speaking about that idea of trying to meet with social media companies in the days and weeks to come to try and get them to tackle the problem of hate speech on their platform. She's described it as a spreading like a virus. She said that social media platforms allow allowed hatred to ferment. She's also talked about the fact that the gunman live streamed his killings and the fact that it went online and that millions of people viewed it. And even though it was removed quite quickly, it popped up on other sites during the course of the weekend. So legislatively very difficult to make massive changes, but the idea is to try and chip away at some of those areas, like how social media platforms can respond to hate speech. That's something that Kathy Hochul is hoping to try and take on.
But Nick, there were 20 million guns sold in the United States last year alone, and it was notable on social media this weekend that amid the outpouring of grief created by the shootings in Buffalo, in Los Angeles and also in Texas, there were many voices saying, well, this just underscores the need to go and get more weaponry. The country's becoming more dangerous and we need to have, as citizens, the weapons to defend ourselves. I mean, it seems now that each of these incidents almost fuels gun sales to the same degree as they fuel calls for meaningful gun control.
Yeah, absolutely right. The statistics show that after mass shootings, there is a spike in gun sales nearly every single time in the United States. So not just this weekend, but every time we see a mass shooting, there is this cycle, this self-perpetuating cycle of people saying, look, the only way to protect ourselves is to buy more weaponry. President Biden has been very clear that he wants to take on the issue of guns. It's something that he said at the beginning of his presidency he wanted to try and tackle, to put in stricter gun control measures. He's even talked about going as far as holding gun manufacturers accountable. So if a gunman uses a particular weapon, victims' families could then sue that gun manufacturer. Almost impossible to try and put into law, but it's something that he says he wants to do. It is a very divisive issue in the US. Very broadly speaking, Democrats are for more tighter gun control measures, whereas Republicans say they have the right to bear arms put into the Constitution, the Second Amendment. Trying to make changes will be very difficult. But remember, in the United States, there are more guns than people. The population of the US is about 330 million. There are 390 million firearms across the United States, more than enough for every single man, woman and child. So even though President Biden wants to make those changes, with this cycle of people saying there's been a shooting, we need to buy more weapons, it's very tough to try and put that into any legislative format that then would be able to pass Congress.
Yeah, but as you said, Nick, definitely worth keeping an eye on those efforts possibly to lift immunity for the manufacturers of those weapons. That's WION's Nick Harper joining us this morning live from right here in Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for that, Nick.